Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining this new episode of ideaXme Rich Connectedness Podcast. Today, with me, the amazing Miri Rodriguez. I'm so honored to have you with us. And without going and kind of explaining anything, I would like to give the floor to you and ask you who you are.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here and to borrow a little time from your audience and just show up to talk to you. My name is Miri Rodriguez. As you said, I am a storyteller. I also lead the global internship team at Microsoft. I'm an author. I'm a mom. I'm a sister. I'm so many things.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing this. So to start with, I thought that because we're in such an surreal times, these COVID-19 times, and we're all kind of pondering about what would life be after this crisis, if you can call it crisis.
Yeah.
I saw that your essential skill is storytelling. You're an expert on storytelling.
Yes.
And I wanted us to kind of navigate this idea of how we can build a new story after COVID-19, how we can use this time as a way of building new stories, new inspirational stories.
Absolutely. So, a lot of people don't really stop to think about designing their own story, designing what's happening to them. A lot of times life happens to us and we just walk by with it instead of owning that narrative and really thinking about what that serves, how it serves other people. What are the opportunities right now with the things that we are experiencing that will grow us, that will change us, that we can pivot? And so you think about business owners, entrepreneurs, and you think, they're right now looking at these opportunities. Where can they come in and pivot? Where can they find something new? Because so much has changed, and now that we're going to be in this post-COVID era, there's so much that we can tap into that is differently. One of the things that I've been consistently talking to personal brands, right, individuals, and also corporate brands, it's what they're thinking next in terms of what they offer, in terms of services and products in themselves. And so I've seen a lot of individuals. I know we've been talking consistently with my friends about the reflection. We have time to reflect upon ourselves. This period has really stopped us from the busyness of life to really bring us back to what is important, what is not important, why are we here, and how do we serve. And so the narrative really is ours to take advantage of and to really drive it, instead of letting life drive it outside of us and we feeling out of control of it. The opportunity really is here to take your origin story. The origin story is really when you were born up until now. Maybe you didn't think about it that way, but if you draw those kind of points and data points of when you were born and what happened since then up until now, who you are at this point, what transformative moments have occurred, and where are you going to take that next. So that's the opportunity, is really to take hold of your story and then send it to the future and say, where is it going to land? Who is going to be my audience, and what am I going to do with it?
Okay, so speaking of this, using this pastime as a way of kind of building the story, kind of borrowing the time of COVID-19 in order to build new stories, I would like to ask you about some information about what is a story actually. What is a story and what is not story? Because we think that anything that can narrate something can be a story, but technically speaking, this is not the case. So how do you define story? What are the characteristics of a story?
Yeah, so a story really is defined by when it has the basic elements of a character, plot, and a conclusion. So if you have those three basic elements, it is really defined as a story. But for me specifically in my work, I found that that was not the kind of stories that I wanted to tell. For me, just because it had a character, plot, and conclusion doesn't mean it's a good story. And so I wanted to build and to craft good stories. And for that, I really tapped into the emotion of story. I did a little more research and I thought, well, storytelling is not just facts, data, information. It's not just putting these plots together and finding a conclusion with a character. It really is around capturing an audience, bringing someone into with your journey, inviting them by the hand. And for that, it has to have emotion, because that is what connects us as human beings. So for me, storytelling, I defined it as the emotional transfer of those facts, those data points, that, all of those assertions, and really under the character, the plot and conclusion, you really drive that emotional transfer. So it's a transfer of information, but it's done through a character, plot and conclusion in a very emotional way.
So in a way, this it's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? Because on one way, you're dealing with the business world, the world that is very kind of purpose oriented. On the other time, you would like to kind of tap into the raw emotional fuel that most of the time you're told to actually not share because it's not very professional. So how did you bridge the gap? How did you find the courage to actually show up differently?
It wasn't easy. I have to say, it was not easy. It took me a few months. What I learned through the process was that I had to remember that we're all human. For me, it was really tapping into empathy. I didn't have any at the time. I didn't even know that that was actually a soft skill that you can hone into and grow. And so empathy really helped me personally. It transformed the way I looked at everything. I looked at people. I looked at, processes. Understanding that behind the technology, behind the business, behind the interview, there's a person. And by that idea alone, just because there's a person, at the human level, we connect at a deep level. We have the opportunity to remember the person I'm looking at right now is a human. Something could be happening to them because of our human condition. There's so much that we can tap into, and I don't have to know them deeply to just understand that humanity factor. So that allowed me to connect with, I was doing very technical stories with engineers. That's very tough to try to get a good story from an engineer. And I just asked them why. It took me like 3 months to break my first story. And we were talking about, it was called containerization. It's just this process of moving data from on-premises to the cloud. And it's this entire end-to-end process. So I wanted to get that to be very human. And I asked them over and over many questions. I just wasn't breaking it. Finally, I said, hey, Rohit, why? And he says, why? What do you mean why? And I said, why are you here? Why are you doing what you're doing here? Why do you get up every morning to do what you do? And then the story started to come in. He was like, oh, well, I came from India. And he started giving me all of these. And I was like, wow, this is it. This is what I was. And it occurred to me, he himself was going through a personal transformation, or we were going through a digital transformation. So the question why, really, in allowing that setting of become human, let's just talk as human people, not from Miri to the engineer, not from the CEO to the subordinate, really just as humans. It enables that space where people begin to get vulnerable and talk about stories.
So in a way, if I can wrap up and kind of summarize what I have heard, what I've received from what you just said, is that inside each and every one of us, there is basically a valuable resource ready to be shared with the world, right? So everyone has a story. That story is actually maybe, for example, if someone wants to kind of start a startup or business or what have you, we immediately think about, do I have enough funding? Do I have this? Do I have that? But we rarely think about, actually, do I have a story? How can I tap into my story? And
Right.
this is, I think, something that I really kind of think it's very crucial, and especially after COVID-19, if we want to kind of develop more entrepreneurial societies and communities.
That's right. I do a lot of coaching for, it's a program called Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship to younger men and women who are building their own businesses from ideas. So it's almost like a Shark Tank idea. They get a summer, they build an idea that actually can turn into a business within a summer. And I often ask them, once they've developed their idea, why did you develop this idea? And the stories come because often it's from a personal need. They saw there was a story about this young woman who her idea was to actually create a portable ultrasound machine for hospitals. And I was like, why would you do that? And she goes, well, when I was 15, I got pregnant and I couldn't afford an ultrasound. So now if we had these portable ones, we can make them available to people like me. And I was like, that's the story. That's exactly what, when you ask the why for entrepreneurs, they saw a need in the market. They felt there was something that was missing. whether a product or service. And that's the story. That's the why. That's why it was born. So really asking yourself that many times, 7 times over, really gets deeper into the story, into the origin story of why it exists.
And in a way, I mean, in a way, it's a skill, isn't it? It's a skill of kind of
Oh
becoming
yeah.
more mindful and kind of more observant of what's going on inside us. How do you cultivate that? How can we
You
encourage that culture in a business environment?
Yeah, it is a decision and a practice, just like anything else. You have to decide first to become empathetic. That is a thing, becoming an empath. I have personally have to do it, and it's taken me a few years actually. So it's a practice. You have to understand it. You have to practice it every day. You have to test it, see how you react to things. The second one, so becoming an empath has 3 layers of it. So there's cognitive empathy, there's emotional empathy, there's compassionate empathy. So it's actually 3 layers you can tap into. Those 3 exercises really help you understand others and also understand yourself. A lot of times we want to understand others without looking introspectively and learning our own emotions, honing into our own emotions. That's a powerful exercise. That enables us to also be vulnerable. So when when I'm vulnerable in business, I'm open, I'm relatable. I am a yes person. I come in and let people see me as human. I'm not manicured all the time. I'm not, perfect all the time, because I'm human. There's a human condition to me. That enables me as a leader to draw people differently, to let them feel comfortable to come to me, to talk to me. So there's so many benefits to you first practicing empathy, and then daring to become vulnerable. That's a bold move, but it's the most rewarding one. It truly is rewarding when you start practicing it.
And I'm becoming kind of more vulnerable. I cannot help but to think about the time after COVID-19, where it's the time that actually our individual stories can contribute in creating a better world. So in a way, it's a vulnerability of being who we are and kind of connecting our own stories to other stories. I would like, I mean, if you have some thoughts to share for the audience about how can we start building stories together as collective, as communities?
I love that question. Thank you so much. What a great question. I think one thing that COVID has taught us, if anything, is our connectedness as a human race. We have understood how one act, how one decision, how one thing affects us all, and we are not disparate from it. We're not disconnected. Rich and poor, it doesn't matter where we are in the world. We've been affected collectively, and so we all have tuned into this idea of we're all home, we're all quarantining, we're all doing, like, living life the same way right now. It is that human connection, doesn't matter where we are. And I love that because it has reminded us once again how fragile we are, but also how strong we can be. And so our story of collective, post COVID-19 really hones down, not only, number one, about the unity of who we are and how one thing can affect. If I do something, it can certainly affect you no matter where you are in the world. So moving away from the meism, me, it's about me and my happiness and my own thing, but really, what does it do for the world? What is it that I do? So that idea, but also the learnings. What have you learned and what have I learned? You've consumed this environment and this process differently than I have, because you have different lived experiences. You've gained insights differently than I have. So how do we bring that together? How is the collective of that? We can talk about those insights. I can sit here and tell you the things, 3 things I've learned from COVID. You'll tell me 3 things, and we can share the learnings, and they'll probably be the same or not, possibly not. But all of them have such insight that we can all put together and learn from and leave as a legacy for the generations to come.
Interesting, and really thank you so much for sharing this. I think I really felt what you said, because I was, while you were explaining, I was thinking about what did I learn from staying at home, and I think one of them was absolutely how much I love my friends and my community, and I didn't know. It's like it's bringing all of this, the kind of soft values, soft capital,
Yeah.
back
Yes.
into kind of the forefront of the mind, and kind of really, oh my God, I love my friends, I love my community, I love the coffee that I used to have. So all of these little things that I think
Yeah.
we all, I think, took for granted at some point.
I know. You know, on that same thread, like it's exactly. I learned that listening is a virtual hug. I'm a hugger, and so I hug my friends all the time. I'm always on them, and I kiss them, and that's just I'm that person. And clearly, I can't do that right now. So that love language, I can't express love right now, and it's very hard for me because I just don't call friends. I hug them. And so I'm learning a lot. I've learned that just on the phone listening or just being on the screen and watching them, it's a virtual hug. And so it's that idea again. We all learn different things. We have different stories from this experience, but they all come down to the same idea of connectedness, which I think it's what we're all learning.
Exactly. And with that spirit of connectedness, what is your vision for, I mean, your own post COVID-19 vision? How can you, or how are you going to show up after all of this hopefully comes to an end?
That's a great question. I'm taking time to reflect. I've always reflected, but I am taking a deeper reflection on our legacy, my legacy as a person, and our legacy as a family. I have two boys and a husband and a dog. And we always talk about that. We have a family five core values. We talk about legacy. But this time it kind of switched for us because legacy tends to be about us, you know, what we're going to do, what we're going to do, and how we're going to do it, what's the mark. But I've been really thinking about legacy beyond us, beyond, you know, the impact of people in general. I've thought about it before, but now I think it has a deeper meaning because people are more susceptible to understanding the the implications of not being connected, the implications of being self-serving. I think people are more receptive today to talk about empathy, to talk about vulnerability. So I'm honing into, you know, I had no idea the book was supposed to launch last December, and the publisher pushed it. No idea it would launch March 30th. And I'm getting so many responses from the idea. When I wrote this, I didn't know, nobody knew this was going to happen in the world. And so many people are just open to that compassion and empathy, vulnerability idea. So I'm seeing the effects of people have an open heart today. We have reflected, we continue to reflect. So the legacy is bigger. The idea is bigger for the next generations. This has truly given an opportunity for all of us to pivot what we're doing and how we're doing it and for whom.
Exactly. And kind of coming to the end of our conversation, if you can share with the audience how they can find you and a little bit of information about your new book. I know that you have a book you also just mentioned. How they can find you, how do you, what are the services that you offer, and all of that information about yourself, because I know how amazing you are and you have a lot to offer to the world. I think it would be
Yeah,
interesting for
thank
the
you.
audience to know as well.
Absolutely. So I wrote a book. It's called Brand Storytelling. It really is around using your brand, whether it's a corporate brand or personal brand, to create that purpose, to create that mission for it using stories. So really taking you through the end to end. It's almost like a manual, a guide on structure, elements, on benchmarking, on the vulnerability factor, a whole chapter on vulnerability. I talk about empathy. I talk about benchmarking your story. I talk about AI and technology and immersive storytelling. So that was a lot to unpack there. There was a lot of things and stories, my personal stories of how I learned this and how you can learn it as well. It really is about democratizing storytelling because I think for years past, many leaders, many politicians, many people of influence know how to use this craft. And a lot of us are left going, okay, they're really good, but I'm not. And I wasn't born that way. Nobody is. We can all learn to tell stories in a really poignant way. So this is what the book is about. You can find me in my book at mirirod.com, MIRIROD.com. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter, on LinkedIn. Instagram and Twitter handle is Miri Rod, at Miri Rod, and of course Miri Rodriguez on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And with that said, we're coming to an end of our conversation. I would like to give the time to you to just say whatever you feel you want to share. Given that our conversation was about stories and writing inspirational stories?
Yeah, I want to tell you, Dr. Shima, first, I want to thank you again for having me. And I want to tell you that our stories are just beyond important. They immortalize us, they leave a legacy for people beyond ourselves when we're no longer here. Imagine if all of us took a journal through this time and wrote down what happened, how we felt, the moments of desperation, people that have we've lost, friends, um, people that we just didn't know had such power, and didn't matter how much richness they had, they still were affected by this. The reflections of it all really, the stories immortalize us and they teach insight. So I want to encourage everyone to use this moment of mindfulness and let those emotions flow, and let the stories be born. It's really about the stories being born, not limiting ourselves. Children don't do that. Children just tell stories, whatever they're thinking about. They just go to the playground. They don't stop to look and think that person looks bigger or the color's different. They just play. So I invite everyone to play and play with their emotions, play with their creativity, put it on paper. You don't have to be a writer. You don't have to be a poet. You just have stories because they flow from the heart, and we all have heart.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Miri, for joining us. It was an honor and pleasure to have you. And with that said, I wish you all the best and please stay safe and hopefully we can connect again.
I hope so. I really do. Thank you so much for having me.